So I'm Ray. Let's see, do I click this yet or do I wait for something? I'm just waiting for everybody else to flood back in. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. I spent 35 years in the Air Force. I retired a few years ago. I went to Stanford. I did a funny little fellowship. And while I was there, I became infatuated with a problem around the South China Sea, and since then have been extremely busy in the maritime transparency space. So this is me. SeaLight is what we do. Right now, SeaLight is a project of the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University, which is to say it's not really a thing yet. But for something that's not really a thing yet, it seems to be doing a lot. It's been doing things that get me a lot of attention in certain circles. So if perhaps you are interested in the South China Sea, if you're interested in gray zone warfare, if you happen to read a lot of Chinese propaganda, you might know who I am. But I read it so that you don't have to. If you ask China, then I either am a CIA agent or a representative of the military-industrial complex, thank you very much, or I have a $500 million propaganda budget that I'm executing. When I mentioned that we are not yet an entity, we're not yet a thing, that also means that I have a $0 budget. I don't get paid. I'm living off of my retirement and my VA disability, and I'm somehow getting all of this attention. That's what I want to explain to you. All right, so let's start just by orienting us. When we talk about China, there's a large discussion that goes on in the national security community as to whether we can call it another Cold War. So all analogies are fraught, so your mileage may vary. You may think Cold War is a good analogy or a bad analogy. I have come to start calling it simply a gray war. And I do that in part because, of course, it's gray zone warfare, and we'll talk about what that is, but also to highlight the fact that actually China is very much at war with us already. And I think we kind of have to get our heads around the fact that the only thing that's changed in the last few years is that we've started waking up to the fact that we are already at war. That is nowhere more apparent than in the South China Sea. Now, when the war is a gray war, the gray zone operator thrives on the zone that is gray. I know that sounds really profound. The gray zone operator needs for the zone to be as gray as possible because then the gray zone operator's actions are opaque and deniable. And they don't even have to be plausibly deniable. They just have to be deniable enough so they can say, how do you know that happened? How do you know we were behind it? How do you know that's what we wanted to do? How do you know it's a militia vessel and not a fishing ship, right? So all they need is just that veneer of deniability in order to be able to thrive and win in the gray zone. And China has been thriving and winning in multiple domains across the gray zone. The South China Sea, the maritime domain, is only one example, but a very, very prominent one. And to understand what's been happening in the South China Sea, I really have to take you back about 5 decades and let you know that when I started looking at China as a security problem, it was a very different South China Sea. And China has been on a 50-year campaign to consolidate its control over the South China Sea and has been extremely successful, right? Everybody remembers they built islands a little while ago, right? They now project power deep into the South China Sea. They do things that are to us inexplicable. I'm going to give you one quick example if you can see the screen here. In the picture here, in the lower left corner, you'll see that off of Vietnam, there is something that looks almost like a Chinese character off of Vietnam. These are ship tracks from a flotilla of ships that sailed around Vietnam for a month, doing nothing but to trace the Chinese character that basically means in Mandarin, China. So, I mean, imagine if Doge got after that, right? So, but in China's gray zone warfare, that makes sense, right? That is telling Vietnam, we own this, and everything that China is doing is proving their point. They do it by a process we often will call salami slicing. they make a minor aggression that might get some news, and then it'll fade away, and then they do it again, and then they do it again, and pretty soon we don't talk about that one anymore. And then they pick another one, and they start doing that one, and then we don't talk about that one anymore. And so over a long period of time, they simply condition us and normalize these behaviors so that we don't talk. Whoever talks about Chinese hacking anymore? It happens so often, it's like page A4 news, right? Nobody talks about it. It is clearly a major aggression, and yet it just sort of slides off our back. But what they want to do in the South China Sea is over a long period of time, not only make these aggressions, but steadily achieve force overmatch so that all of the other discussions eventually become passé, right? Why are we even talking about who owns the South China Sea? Because everywhere you look, there is China. And that's already happening. So when we talk about China and we talk about war, I remain convinced that Xi Jinping, as he sits there in Beijing right today, does not want to go to armed conflict for Taiwan or the South China Sea or anything. And he doesn't think that he has to. He believes that over a period of time, China can simply get everything it wants through a process of political warfare and present it eventually as a fait accompli. And why is he wrong? So into this came SeaLight. The funny thing about SeaLight, as I said, is it has no money and no employees. It has a bunch of volunteers, many of them students, and all we do is track some ships and get some satellite imagery from nice people like Sky-Fi and show the world what's been happening. And this has been an astonishing story. So here's my little picture of the Chinese flotilla off of Vietnam, right? A couple of years ago, I didn't even use Twitter or X or whatever we call it, right? I now have a pretty major following. I had to throw in a good Sky-Fi picture. So this is China's largest Coast Guard ship, which is 3 times as big as our national security cutter. Next, so this is it over here. This is a much smaller Philippine Coast Guard vessel at Sabina Shoal, which China, as of today, now pretty much owns. And that's a change from last year. So what we've been doing is shedding a light on these things as they happen so that the zone is no longer gray. In the Philippines, we had an astonishingly major impact. So I just saw some people from the Philippine government last week, and they are on alert that if Ray Powell tweets something, that they are to make sure that they are ahead of it before it hits the news so that they can say what they're doing about it. I did not mean to sort of put the Philippine government on notice, but in a lot of ways, that's what's happened. And what has ended up happening is that the Philippines has vastly increased its resilience to gray zone operations over the last 2 years. You can see that they did things like put reporters out to sea so that they could be the ones who show the world what's happening. They've got much cooler stuff than I do. I've got little lines on a map. They've got like video and pictures and stuff. Just making sure nobody's shooting at me. All right. So, and the interesting thing, part of why SeaLight became a thing is we figured, look, who sucks at putting out information more than government? I worked for government for 35 years. We suck at putting out information. So what we decided to do was figure out, could we develop the information on the outside using commercially available technology, put it directly into the public? And that's part of the reason we did that was because the Philippine government for 6 years was run by a guy named Rodrigo Duterte, who his most endearing feature was that he hates America with a white-hot passion. And so we thought if governments can be so easily sort of lulled into holding on to and suppressing all of this information, we need to be able to have the ability to put it out separately. So there was, let's see if I can go backwards. So if you do go back and watch the season premiere of 60 Minutes this year, so that is me talking to them part of this idea of maritime transparency is building these relationships with media outlets and bringing them to places so that they can show the world. And 60 Minutes was of special interest to us because who watches 60 Minutes? People in Washington, D.C. And so we managed to get them to see, and I think the only downside of the whole thing was that they were asleep when their ship got rammed, so we weren't actually filming it at the time. So other than that, things went pretty well. So what the Philippines has then done is turn around and begin going out and assertively taking pictures of all the aggressions against them. And they did this in response to what the environment that SeaLight helped engender. And they are now achieving effects, strengthening their own they have completely reworked their national security strategy around the external threat and archipelagic defense. They have increased their budgets for coast guards and maritime security. They are also getting help from places like the United States. One of the only places that we have not suspended aid to is the Philippines. Why? Because the Philippines is showing pictures of the aggression and everybody knows where the fight is. They're getting help from Canada and Japan and Europe and Australia. All of this is because of the power of transparency. They are also imposing tremendous reputational cost on China. The only problem is we don't know how high China's tolerance for pain is these days. It seems to be pretty damn high. Okay, so where are we? We are at the point where we're actually going to try to maybe actually pay some staff, maybe pay for our own services, like when we get ship tracking services, see if we can pay that bill. So we're about to turn ourselves into a 501c3 nonprofit. So no more project at Stanford University. Now we're going to actually try to do it the way we're supposed to do it. Build out more sensors. You have the ability to put sensors aboard ships. You have the ability to put sensors on drones. There are lots of other ways that we can get data. We'd like to get deep into the training world. What we want to do is we want to let 100 flowers bloom, right? We want to have lots and lots of qualified open source intelligence analysts shining a light into gray zones, not just in the South China Sea, but in other places where China and other gray zone operators thrive. All right, that's it. That's me. Sorry, on the right, I also have a podcast, so why should we care about the Indo-Pacific, in case you're an Indo-Pacific enthusiast. I do that with my friend Jim Caruso. And if you want to email me, that's how you can do it. And if you're a glutton for punishment and you like following people on X, you can see, actually, I confess that during some of the talks today, I was in the back tweeting out the latest on rogue ships off of Taiwan. So you can see all that. So thanks.